So it's kind of intimidating for me to stand in front of all these very smart people who know lots about quantum stuff. I do have an EE background. I did get my quantum physics course, but it's a long time ago. But I must say that yesterday I felt very familiar with my EE background. I heard about bandwidths and filters and reflections, and this was actually things I could understand. So I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me, and I hope to entertain you in the next 40 minutes with my views on public key cryptography and whether or not your community will succeed to obliterate public key cryptography. Okay, so we'll speak about what's happening today, what the problems are, how these things get broken, and then we look at the future of public key cryptography, which classical cryptographers call post-quantum crypto. I guess you may know it all started about 40 years ago. On the left you have Merkle, Diffie, and Hellman. And Diffie and Hellman looked at two questions, and they will keep coming back in the talk. The first question is, if two people who never met before and don't share a secret, can they talk and at the end up with a secret? And Merkle found actually also a solution to this problem. Diffie and Hellman also looked at the second question. Is it possible to digitally sign messages? To take something which we have on paper and put it in the electronic world. And it turns out that, in fact, the answer to both questions is public key cryptography. So with the same mathematical concept, trapdoor one-way functions, you can actually solve both questions. I guess you're all familiar with this. So you encrypt with a public key, and you decrypt with the private key, which actually makes the key management problem a lot easier. You shift secrecy of data to authenticity of public keys. And if you swap things for the other question, you sign with the private key, and you verify with a public key. So the game is that you can authenticate gigabytes of data with short public keys. So that's the concept. Can this be done? Well, Diffie and Hellman didn't solve quite the problem of public key encryption, but they came very close. They solved public key agreement, how two parties can agree on a key with the famous Diffie-Hellman protocol. So you agree on a group and a generator in this group. Alice sends an X and computes alpha to the X, sends it to Bob. Bob chooses a Y, computes alpha to the Y, and sends it to Alice. And then both parties can compute the value alpha to the XY. And this happens to be equal, of course, alpha to the XY and alpha to the YX, and unknown to Eve. At least that's what we hope. So, of course, if Eve could somehow derive X from alpha to the X or Y from alpha to the Y, then this protocol would be insecure. So, in fact, we assume that discrete log, so inverting this function, is actually hard. In fact, we need more. We need to assume for Diffie-Hellman to be secure, we need the assumption called the Diffie-Hellman assumption. I mean, the assumption says Diffie-Hellman is secure. So in fact, the Diffie-Hellman assumption is that Diffie-Hellman is secure. We can't prove this, but we hope that if Eve sees those two values, she can't compute this value. Then the answer to public key encryption came from Rivest-Shamir Edelman in 1978. I'm going to be very fast. I assume most of you are familiar with this. You choose two large primes, P and Q. You multiply them. Then you compute the order of the multiplicative group. You compute actually an exponent, E and D. What you make public is encryption exponent and the modulus. What you keep secret is a decryption exponent. And the operations are very simple. It's a modular exponentiation to encrypt and to decrypt. So in Diffie-Hellman, the base was fixed and the exponent is variable. Here, in fact, it's the other way around. The exponents are fixed, but the base is variable. And so is this secure? Well, security of RSA is based on the fact, I would say empirical observation, that it's kind of easy to find large primes, but it seems to be hard to factor their product. And then in the mid-80s, Miller and Koblitz independently came up with the idea of having a different group called elliptic curve group. And the nice thing about the elliptic curve group is that you can make fancy graphs. Disadvantage is you can't explain it to your manager in a few minutes. Mathematics is a bit more complex than RSA or Diffie-Hellman. And the main reason why we have elliptic curves is we have shorter key lengths, as we will see. So what of this stuff is now being used? Well, first, in the real world, you never find public key cryptography by itself because it's too slow. You always have public key cryptography combined with classical cryptography. Just like today in the quantum products, you have still AES in there for speed. This is the same for all our crypto we have. Second, when public key was invented, in the mid or late 70s, it could not be implemented. Rivest has tried about 10 years to make an RSA chip, and he kept failing at it. So only in the late 80s, early 90s, people could actually use public key cryptography. So it took about 15 years. So there is quite some deployment today. The biggest deployment is, in terms of billions, is updates of all your apps and devices. Every time you give an update, this update is signed by Microsoft, by Apple, or by the app developer. This is several billion applications of public key cryptography. If you do a payment in the rest of the world, except for the US and Canada, you actually use EMV with a credit card, and this uses public key cryptography. This is the largest public key infrastructure with billions of users. It's currently based on RSA. They have decided 3 years ago they will switch to elliptic curves, and it will take them until 2030 before the rollout is completed. There is tens of millions of bank terminals, and changing those cannot happen overnight. Okay, of course, many countries have now electronic ID cards.
So what does this Canadian card use? It has a chip.
Well, it may be EMV, because EMV is being rolled out. It's probably RSA still.
So they have it in Canada?
It has, yes. So there is about 100 million electronic identity cards and electronic passports, which the US has imposed to the rest of the world. We all have to have a passport with a chip. And the German chip industry is very happy with this because they make heaps of money selling chips which are hardly ever used. Then a very big deployment which we all have been using is TLS, SSL, which is public key cryptography to secure communication to the internet. The vision behind TLS was that every one of us would have a certificate and have public key crypto, but in fact only the servers have public keys and private keys. We actually have passwords. So this was only half realized. It's about 10 million servers, and SSL TLS is widely used, mostly to protect credit card numbers, and also to protect our connections to email more and more. But until recently, until the Snowden revelations, in fact, only a very small fraction of web servers actually used TLS. DNSSEC is a small deployment. Skype, 500 million users, uses public key cryptography. Bitcoin, only 1 million users, uses signatures. And then probably in 5 to 10 years from now, you have the Internet of Things, and there will be tens of billions of devices, and likely they will also use public key cryptography. Now you can see there is only 3 things here in blue, because only 3 things use encryption. All the rest is authentication. Only signatures. In fact, governments don't like us to use encryption. They want us to use as little encryption as possible, and it's still reflected today that most applications of cryptography do not use encryption. It's mostly to authenticate software and devices and users. There is still lots of applications that do not use public key cryptography, like all our mobile phones for calls. It's all still symmetric crypto, good old symmetric crypto. Hard disk encryption, pay TV, and content protection. So overall, cryptography is widely used, but if you look at internet traffic, only a very small fraction of it is actually encrypted. And of this fraction, only a very small fraction is properly encrypted, which means there is no backdoor, or the encryption is not weak, or the keys are not in the hands of one or more governments. Okay? That's the reality on the floor today. So as I said, mostly cryptography is used for data and entity authentication. Confidentiality is very limited. Of course, government and military need it. They believe they have the right to do this. The second big application is protection of movies, content protection of software. The industry uses encryption to prevent you from copying your files, your videos, and there is a new standard coming up for 4K TV, and this time they believe it will be really secure. The telcos do not offer you end-to-end encryption. In spite of all the fancy encryption in your phone, all the encryption goes to a network node where it's decrypted, so governments can access it. In spite of all the computational power here, we still are not allowed by governments to have end-to-end encryption. Skype is end-to-end. It's a proprietary standard, and I'm very sure that governments have backdoors to it. So governments have succeeded. There is a report from 5 years ago, there is a report from 6 or 7 years ago by Tom Burson who made a short summary, but since then the scheme has been modified. So nobody knows what it does.
So they may have messed it up anyway, right?
They have messed it up. Trust me. Hard disk encryption, I think also there is backdoors in there. You may have read the news about iCloud. There is encryption in iCloud, but be sure Apple has a backdoor, has a key to this. If the government comes and asks for data, they can give it. So that's the state of affairs today. We have lots of crypto, but in fact, it's not used to protect your secrets, as you may think. It's to protect corporations. That's the essence of cryptography today. The other message is that a secure channel, as cryptographers, we only start understanding it right now, what a secure channel is. So you would think it's very easy, but if you look at TLS, you have reordering of packets, replay of packets, dropping of packets, and also metadata. I don't know whether you've been following the Snowden revelations, but in fact, a lot of information can be derived about who talks to whom, which website do you visit, when do you contact what, and so from where do you contact something, and this is not protected in most of our systems. So in fact, in communication security, it's the easy problem, and we've solved the easy part of it, but we don't use it. And the hard problem, the metadata protection, we don't know how to do it efficiently. Okay, that's the reality. What we do very well is authenticate data and protect content. But essentially, the idea that cryptography is there to protect Alice and Bob is very naive. Cryptography is there to protect the big corporations and governments against Alice and Bob. This is how money is being made. Okay, so then, the widely used systems I mentioned, RSA, Diffie-Hellman, discrete log in mod P, and elliptic curve groups, they all depend on a small set of algebraic number theory problems. And so we believe that we understand their security based on empirical data. But are these problems really hard? And I'll give you the definition of Jim Massey of a hard problem. A hard problem is probably a problem nobody works on. I mean, you should be crazy as a grad student to work on factoring. What is the chance you will find something? Okay, if you find something, you'll be famous and rich, or maybe even both. But nobody works on those problems. There is very few people, only a handful of people work on those hard problems. What you see here is historic progress in factoring. In green is for general RSA numbers. In blue is for special numbers. So the current record is 768 bits, was established in 2009. And for special form numbers, the record is 1061 bits. So you can look at those graphs, and you can think that based on this, you can predict progress in factoring. You can try to do that. So there is some improvement in algorithms, there is some improvement in computational power, but in fact, nobody knows what's going to happen, right? So what about NSA? You all know about NSA, right? Okay, so NSA, can they factor RSA 512? Yes, for breakfast. 768, they can do this. 1024, which everybody's using today, likely. 1536, perhaps. 2048, who knows? Maybe even 4096, I don't know. Okay. So there was an article last year about some breakthrough made in 2013, not in factoring, but in discrete log. And so it got quite some attention in the press. So people even called this a cryptocalypse. And nothing to do with quantum computers. In fact, what happened was that there was a breakthrough for special discrete logs. So the form of complexity of all these algorithms for factoring and discrete log is of this crazy form. It's actually a very simple function. If a is 0, this function is polynomial time. You only have this term. And if a is, so this term, if a is 1, you have exponential time, and the problem is believed to be hard. So the question is, what is a? So in 81, it was shown that a is 1/2 of factoring and discrete log. An algorithm was shown that was halfway between exponential and polynomial time, so better than one would hope. For elliptic curves, we still only know algorithms with a, 1, and the constant in front of it 1/2, square root algorithms, exponential square root. And then there was a breakthrough 30 years ago, was shown that a is actually 1/3. And this was unmoved for between 1984 and 2013. And so the breakthrough last year is that for some special cases of discrete log, a is 1/4. And then very quickly there was a follow-up result which actually shows that a can be 0 for certain numbers. And this translated into records. So a 9,000-bit special form discrete log was broken last year. And also elliptic curves, which were believed to be 128-bit secure, are only 59-bit secure. So this is not for factoring. It could happen next year. The same people could now see how to apply it to factoring. And then, of course, we're in trouble. We have to move to a moduli of something like 50,000 bits, which will make your transactions a bit slower. Or elliptic curve seems to be OK. Now, in practice, nobody except the NSA factors moduli. Okay? This is just Factoring is good for the NSA, it's good for academics. In practice, you break stuff the other way. Okay. This is very important to remember. So this is a setup from our lab. It's a chip we designed with some very secure elliptic curve crypto in this. It's a very expensive copper wire, very expensive antenna we just made in 10 seconds. And voila, you see the key here from looking at the symbol. So physics trumps mathematics, power consumption, radiation, timing, heat, sound. It all has been used to get keys out of devices. And of course, if you go further, you use tools used in semiconductor manufacturing like probes or FIPS, all this kind of cool stuff to actually go into the chip and read out the keys. Because in the end, your keys are somewhere in a chip. You have to encrypt something, and you can get those keys out. It's only a matter of how much does it cost. Is it 5 million, 10 million, or 20 million? That's the main message. And so this also applies, of course, to quantum products that actually do then asymmetric encryption. You can get the key there out as well. So a more shocking attack or surprising attack was done about 20 years ago on RSA. In fact, if you use RSA in practice for performance reasons, you will always compute mod P and mod Q to be faster. It's called Chinese remainder theorem, and it gains you a factor of 4 in performance. So all the chips today do this. All credit cards and so on, everybody uses Chinese remainder. Now what these guys found out is that if you ask a device to generate a signature, but you disturb the device during the signature, if it's a smart card, you can actually reduce the power, or you can maybe change the clock, or you can maybe shine a laser on a chip for a short time. What will happen is that you can disturb one computation and not the other one. And now some simple mathematics, sorry for this, shows that you can, if you have the correct result and the wrong result, you can actually take a GCD and find the factor. End of game. So RSA, which held up with no mathematical attacks of any significance for about 16 years, suddenly was broken completely with a very trivial attack. So you have to check that all cryptographic computations are correct, but you also have to check the checker and so on. It's a never-ending problem. Okay? So overall, there is actually an academic conference called CHESS, where people publish every year 25 to 30 papers just on this problem of side channel attacks, fault attacks, and all these kind of things. Okay? So attacks get very sophisticated. These people actually start reading books on statistics and doing really cool attacks. We also have quite good countermeasures. And we also have now, since about 8 or 10 years, we have now proofs on security called leakage resilience in certain models. There is a big debate whether these models are actually meaningful or not. The practitioners say no, the theory people say, well, let's see. But there is quite some research to try to prove things secure even in such adverse conditions. The problem is cost. If you implement those countermeasures, your cost goes up by a factor 2, but sometimes by a factor 100. Okay? While if you work in industry, your boss says your product can be 20% slower or more power consumption or area, you don't get even a factor 2. That's the reality today. So in some sense, cryptography as deployed today is moving back to the medieval times of security by obscurity. So in the past, the algorithm was secret. Today, the algorithm is secret, is public, but the way it's implemented and the countermeasures are secret. If I know the countermeasures, I can break it. But because I don't know the countermeasures, I can decide to spend a year of a grad student figuring out which countermeasures have been used, but this is very risky and expensive. Right? So this is the reality today. These products are evaluated in labs on the common criteria, but what is exactly done in these labs are state secrets. We don't know what is exactly being done, and both the governments and the companies carefully guard their secrets. But overall, the message is, in the long run, industry is losing. They're very pessimistic. I remember that we used our first focused ion beam to read out a key from a chip in '96, and then we had to actually go to a different country to use a focused ion beam. And I found out 10 years later there were 4 focused ion beams the corridor down the road. Right? So it's a very hard battle to keep things secure. Okay. There is, of course, other ways to get the keys. If you're the NSA, you can send a security letter and ask for the key. That's what they do. And you can even say, don't tell anybody who asked for it. So I'm quite sure, I can't prove this, but I'm quite sure that Google, Apple, Microsoft got such letters and were told to give their keys. You can replace public keys. That's as good as getting the secret key. Okay? Or you can maybe put a backdoor or trapdoor in a standard. So most cryptographic devices get some randomness that can be from reverse biasing a diode, or from some radiation, or from some oscillators, or maybe some quantum stuff. It doesn't matter. So what you do is you get actually a seed, but most of those things are pretty slow. And so if you need many random bits, you have a pseudo-random number generator which stretches this into keys and random challenges. Now, what was discovered about a year ago is that one of the US government standards called EC dual DRBG, dual EC DRBG, a very complex name. It's a very slow algorithm. And it was first standardized in a closed club, and then it became public in 2006. And so very interestingly, this standard contains a Q and a P, 2 points of elliptic curves. I mean, it was pointed out that if you know the relation between Q and P, then you can actually break this random number generator, and from one output, predict all past and all future outputs. Okay? So the question is, who generated Q and P? I will tell you, NSA. Do they have this D? We don't know. Maybe they generated Q and P randomly and nobody can compute the D, but I suspect it's not the case. I don't think NSA does all the effort to put something in a standard if they then don't have the D. Of course, as a user, you could actually try to be smart and use a different Q and P, but in fact, the standard says don't do this because you may be weak if you do it. And anyway, if you do replace it, your product will not be validated. It will be disapproved by the US government, cannot be sold in the US market. So you have to have the trapdoor. So this leaked thanks to Snowden. So about a year ago, this appeared in the New York Times, that there was actually a backdoor, in fact, that the NSA is undermining encryption systems, IT systems, networks, endpoint communications, and is actually undermining standards. So this is just a warning for your community. In the next decades, you're going to make standards as well. NSA will be at the table, GCHQ will be at the table. They will try to undermine your work. Okay? It's something which I would say, it didn't surprise me, but I think they've been quite blunt, though, wasting quite some taxpayers' money. So NIST has withdrawn the standard, or will withdraw it. They now disapprove it. Okay. Of course, then, there is the other small problem we have that we heard in the roundtable yesterday. Maybe large quantum computers can be built, or maybe I should write when it is built. I don't know what I should write. But of course, then we have big problems with all algebraic number theory schemes. In symmetric key, we're doing much better. We just need to double the key length. And for hash collisions, we're still OK. Another leak of Snowden is that the NSA spent about $85 million trying to build a quantum computer. I don't know whether that's peanuts money, but I would like such a grant. And of course, we don't know what they got afterwards. Maybe they doubled or tripled, or for them, this is pocket money. $85 million. OK, so what to do? Well, as a response to Peter Shor's work, the community has scrambled together and actually looked for new public key algorithms that would not fall for quantum computers. And in fact, we didn't have to do much. We just had to go back to the 70s. Because in the 70s, several other schemes were proposed. Okay. In fact, signatures based on one-way functions. This is Lampert, Winternitz, very well-known work. There is public key encryption based on error-correcting codes by Michaelis. And also lattices. You can say lattices go more or less back to knapsacks. So they're a bit different, but they go basically back to the same principles of having actually a matrix of vectors and doing sums on those in a certain mathematical structure. Or in fact, in the 80s, people came up with the idea of multivariate polynomial equations. So there are some systems for which we don't know today any quantum algorithms. So if you're looking for a good research problem, try to apply quantum computing to those problems. Okay, then you can make our life even more difficult. So I prepared quite some slides on the mathematics of this. I don't know whether I have enough time because I want to actually give a bigger picture. So I'll be very quick on those because after being here yesterday and hearing the open or the roundtable, I actually thought it was more interesting to give you the broader context rather than giving you the neat mathematics behind those schemes. But you'll get the slides with a bit more detail, so I'll go fast now on the details. So the hashing scheme is very simple. You just keep as secret an input value, and the output you make public of a one-way function. So this is a one-way function, and this is called the one-time signature. So what you do is you prepare a number of inputs and outputs of a one-way function. Okay, in this case, I have 2, 4, 6, 8, so I will be able to sign a 3-bit message with this. So now I will hash those things in a tree, and I will use as my public key this root value of the tree. Okay, so what I keep secret is the inputs to my one-way function, the 8 inputs, and what I publish is the public key. If I now want to sign a message, say the message consisting message number 2, okay, so I can sign 8 messages in this case because I have 3 bits. So I have to sign message number 2. What I will reveal is the image under the one-way function of my secret plus the values along the path. So I will also release those 3 values. And together they show I have a path in my tree from place number 1, so place number 2, this is 1, this is 2, to the root. And this will actually authenticate the value 2. Okay, this is a very simple principle. It's called a one-time signature because I now, of course, reveal those values and I can no longer use them again. So you have to find clever ways to then reuse or re-sign part of your tree, and there is a lot of research on this, how to do this efficiently. But the nice thing is you just need a one-way function. And the price to pay is that you need to have quite some storage in your system, and that you have to have a clever way to keep refreshing this public key, or to have a very large authenticated base to start from. So you see some numbers here. If you go for the same security level as RSA, in fact, signing is about 6 times faster, verifying is about the same speed, your signature is about 10 times bigger, and your public key is about twice bigger. So in fact, it's not so bad. Your secret key, of course, is 3 times bigger. So in fact, this is deployable today. For everything, for example, related to automatic updates, it would be very easy to, instead of writing an RSA public key in every module, to write such a root of a tree. And then if you do it cleverly, you can easily design thousands of updates. You can not sign it for an infinite number of times or billions, but most devices are not updated more than a few thousand times anyway. So this is actually available and ready there today. There is just no standards, but it could be implemented very easily. Then coding. This is a solution for encryption. We don't know how to do good signature schemes with coding. This is an open problem. People have tried, but they failed miserably. Essentially, what you do is you take a GOPA code. It's one of the well-known codes with error capability W, and then you transform the matrix of the code so that it looks like a random code. So you just permute the rows and columns, and you multiply with an invertible matrix. And so this is what you make public, is your transform matrix. And to encrypt the message, you encode it as a W-weight code word E, and what you send over is a syndrome H times E. And so if you can decode, you can do syndrome decoding, you can actually recover from the syndrome the error and the message. This is very easy. But you can only do this if you know the structure of H and if you can use the ID of the GOPA code. If you don't know this structure, then H is a random code, and random codes are hard to decode. We don't have a good algorithm for this. So essentially, recovering the private key, the GOPA code from the random matrix, well, we don't know how to do this. There is no proof. This is hard, but nobody knows how to do this. Recovering a message actually relies on the NP hardness of syndrome decoding for random codes. So this is quite well understood problem. So nobody knows, of course, whether you can get the GOPA code out of this H. The parameters proposed by McAleese in '78 were only broken 3 or 4 years ago. And there is now new parameters which actually give you reasonable performance. The main disadvantage of this scheme is that your keys are quite large, or your public key is about 187 kilobytes. So this will not fit in very small devices, but on the internet it's not a problem at all. You know, this is the picture of a cat. Right? It's not a big overhead to send another 187 kilobytes. So, and in fact, decryption here is way faster than RSA. So it's about 20 times faster to decrypt with McAleese than with RSA. So the performance here is quite good. So the problem is communication of public keys will be expensive, and storage of public keys will be expensive. I didn't have the numbers yet. I was looking at them. I think it's actually even fast. The problem is the following. RSA with small exponent, where people have some reservations about, is unbeatable. Okay? So I think encrypt probably will be a factor 10 to 100, but still very, very fast. And encryption is faster than decryption, obviously. Okay, so I didn't have the numbers yet. I was working on them, but I couldn't find any good numbers. But so it will be a bit slower than RSA, but it's definitely very fast as well. It's faster than decryption. So the other approach is lattices. So I don't know whether you know this thing, but this is not lattices, it's lattices. Okay, this is an algebraic structure. A set of points where you have integer coefficients over a vector space, and there is quite some deep mathematical theory behind those. And the game is that a lattice is a vector space, has multiple bases, and you can actually identify good bases, which are short bases, where the vectors are relatively orthogonal. This is a good basis, and you will use it as private key. And then the bad basis is one like this, where you have long vectors which are actually not close to orthogonal. Okay, that's your public key. And so, in general, reducing a bad basis to a good basis is believed to be not so easy. Again, we can't prove this, and also there is no known quantum algorithm to do this. So the problem we rely on in cryptography is very often the shortest vector problem. So I'm given a vector v, find in the lattice the shortest vector to this. So this is the shortest vector in the lattice, find the shortest vector in the lattice. And this problem is quite well understood. And so it's known to be hard, and there is also a relaxed version where you actually find the shortest vector up to a factor gamma. And so the complexity of this problem is related to gamma. So if even small gamma, this problem is known to be NP hard. Exact algorithms that are known run in exponential time, and there is polynomial time approximations for exponential approximations. So if gamma is exponential, then there is polynomial time algorithms like the famous LLL algorithm, which actually does much better than we can prove. But so this is the state today, and so this is what we try to build crypto on. What is being used today is a bit different from the original ideas of Itai and Dwork from the mid-90s. What people use today is learning with errors. You have actually a secret vector S, and what you leak is the inner product with a known vector of this secret S. But of course, if you do this a few times, then you just have linear algebra, and you can solve the matrix, and you find S. So to make it hard, you actually add some noise. And so this is known as the learning with errors. So you learn the inner product of your secret with random vectors, but once in a while you get the wrong answer. And so the question is, can you now recover this secret? Okay? So, and you can show that this problem can be reduced to a problem related to lattices. And in fact, there is quite some very cool crypto going on there. I had slides for this, but I will skip them in the interest of time because I'm running out of time. But so there is quite neat constructions. So again, quite large public keys, 104 kilobytes. Ciphertext expansion, also 416 bytes to encrypt 1 bit, so not really efficient. But there is tricks to make this more efficient by going to ideal lattices, to actually go to ring variants of it. And there is still an argument whether or not this structure makes the problem weaker, but then you can make it more efficient. So essentially, your matrix A is not a random matrix, but is a circular matrix. So you only need to store one row. That's mostly the idea behind this stuff. So summary of lattice-based stuff is very efficient to implement. It's just adding vectors, right? All the schemes are extremely efficient. Also very nice, reductions are for worst case. So generating keys is easier. And for most other problems in number theory, we have average case reductions. Here we have worst case reductions. So even if the worst case is hard, so you can reduce your problem, your cryptographic problem, to the worst case of the instance. There is some random vectors that to be generated according to Gaussian distribution. That seems to be a very tricky math problem. Nobody knows how secure these lattices are. There is hundreds and hundreds of papers about what cool stuff you can do with lattices. There is a handful of papers on how to find shortest vectors and how to solve those problems, the hard problems. Again, people don't work on those hard problems. It's only a few people doing this. And so if you ask the community today, so which lattice should I use? Then they all look at the ceiling and say, we don't know. It's difficult. So there is also no challenges up there. And the keys are pretty large. And then the final type of scheme is back to the 80s. In fact, it's a very simple idea. RSA is a polynomial over a finite field. What if I had two polynomials in two variables? Or in general, n polynomials in n variables? Can I also make a public key scheme out of this? And so the idea is to stick for now with quadratic, because already your public key graph is very big if it's quadratic. And so the idea is to have a simple polynomial called f, which is easy to invert. And then you use matrices S and T to actually hide the structure in this simple polynomial and give you the public key P. That's more or less the idea. So you have a simple structured polynomial f, which is easy to invert, but by applying S and T, linear matrices, you can actually transform this into a random-looking set of multivariate equations. And again, this problem is known to be hard. Solving quadratic equations is known to be a hard problem. But of course, nobody knows whether solving those kind of equations is hard. Okay, this field got quite some attention, but I would say the track record is not so good. All the encryption schemes have been broken. There is many, many wild ideas, but only a few are still standing. Public keys, again, are large. And there is many clever tricks how to break those schemes. So I would not bet my money on it. But there is a few that have survived now for a decade. Probably an area that deserves more research, how to do this properly. OK, so now back to the broader story, my final 5 minutes. 2 minutes, OK. I'll probably be very short then. I think the main message I want to give is that if you look at the Snowden revelations, we should not move all our problems to one place. One public key, one secret key. This has been hurting us badly, because then the NSA or the other government goes after this key, however, what they can, and your security is compromised. So this mantra of cryptography, move everything to one secret and then protect it, this is what we should do. I don't think we should do this. In fact, we should spread our secrets and then use multi-party computation, distributed systems, so that you can at least hope that the NSA can compromise 3 of your systems, but not all of them. And so with distributed cryptography, we can hopefully survive. So the problem is not network security, but is in fact the system security. That's the one important message I want to give. There is quite some research on this. There is very nice results, but there is almost no deployment. Because of course it's more complex, but I think in terms of robustness, this is a principle to stick to. And then I think for those of you who sell products, think very carefully how your opponent is undermining you. So if you look at dual EC, people put actually trapdoors in the standard. People actually put hardware backdoors or software backdoors. There is this picture from Snowden revelations where Cisco routers are being shipped to a special office to give an extra chip, so the US government has access to them remotely. So if you are important for the US government, your PC and your routers get extra chips for free. And even if you never hook them up to the internet, with radar technologies, they can actually read out what's happening on your device. So how are you sure that your device is correct? Most people don't know that even their processor can be updated. So Intel can remotely update your processor. At that moment, maybe Intel's processors don't have trapdoors, but if they want to put a trapdoor in afterwards, they can still do this. Okay, so this is why countries like Russia and China design their own operating systems, hardware, chips, because in fact, it's not about the crypto, it's the whole chain. From the design till the deployment, how do you protect this? And if in any state you're circumvented, then you're gone. So I was going to make predictions for the next 40 years. I have no clue whether everything will be quantum and I will be unemployed. I have no clue. Maybe you know better than I do. I don't think it's likely that all public key crypto will disappear. Okay, I don't think it's so likely. If it happens, symmetric crypto may come back, because public key crypto is very nice if you're offline, but if you're always online, symmetric crypto can solve many problems. For example, EMV, if you're online for a payment, EMV doesn't need public key crypto. And you just go to your bank and they say, does this guy have money? Yes, and you get your payment. In fact, EMV is only designed to allow offline payments. But where do you find still a gas station that is not online? Okay, so in some sense, public key has made itself not needed, and so symmetric key can come back in many of those places. I think that in the next 10 to 20 years, we'll get some of those other schemes deployed because they have very neat properties. Okay. If only multi-party computation, I didn't speak about fully homomorphic encryption, all these kind of cool things, So I think some of the lattice-based schemes in particular allow for very nice features. So I hope that those things will be more and more used. So I think that those two predictions go together. That for some of those techniques you need lattice-based crypto, and then hopefully you get also quantum computing resistance last. And maybe it's all not so bad and we still keep RSA in 20 years or 40 years. I don't know, I have no clue, it could happen as well. But I think Gilles spoke about long-term security problems, and they do apply to confidentiality, but they don't apply to authenticity. You can always re-sign stuff. Okay? So this is, I think, very important to note. Also note that governments do not want you to have confidentiality. More or less, if you look at the developments today, confidentiality is only the privilege of the rich and the powerful. And more or less, all of us, unless we build our own systems, the geeks among us, and we protect our own privacy, our governments and the corporations are not going to do it. So I think that's a very important message to end. Thank you very much for your attention.